My daughter said, "Oops, old hag is dead. She won't survive after the surgery." But she didn't know that. Oops, old hag is dead. She won't survive after the surgery, thank God, finally. Her voice didn't come from beside me, it came from the phone the doctor was holding, as if the first thing waiting for me in this world was proof that my own child wanted me gone. That was the very first sentence I heard, when consciousness tore through the heaviness of anesthesia and pulled me back into a world so blindingly bright, so unforgivingly cold, that for a moment I wished I had stayed under, because waking up to my daughter's voice dripping with relief, triumph, and something crueler than hatred carved a deeper wound in my chest than the surgeon's scalpel ever could. I lay there, unable to move, my chest burning with every rise and fall of the ventilated breaths forced through me by the machine, my eyelids heavy as lead, my vision fogged and unfocused, but my hearing painfully sharp enough to catch the tremor in the man's voice beside me, the man I dimly recognized as Dr. Aaron Whitlock, though at that moment his presence felt distant, like a shadow leaning over me while my daughter's laughter, thin, cruel, celebratory, echoed again through the speaker of his phone. "Yes," he said, and his voice, though low, carried the unmistakable strain of someone trying very hard not to break something, a silence, a table, or maybe just his own composure. She said it exactly like this. "Oops, old hag is dead. She won't survive after the surgery." And they're celebrating right now. They're drinking and laughing while she is lying here, barely breathing. If my heart had not been stitched together hours earlier, I think it might have shattered into pieces at that very moment, not because I was surprised, no, not truly, because mothers know their children, even the ones who stop loving them, even the ones who grow sharp and distant and ashamed of the women who raised them. But because hearing it aloud, hearing my death treated like a punchline, hearing my flesh and blood rejoice at the thought of losing me, that was a pain nothing in my 74 years had ever prepared me for. The room felt too bright, the air too thin, the machines too loud. Inside me, the world was falling apart quietly. Dr. Whitlock's footsteps moved closer, their rhythm uneven, and though my eyes remained only half open, swimming in the haze of post-surgery medication, I could sense the heaviness in him, a heaviness that didn't belong to a doctor doing his rounds, but to a man who had just witnessed something profoundly wrong. "She deserves to know the truth," he murmured, his voice breaking into a whisper meant for no one, or perhaps meant for God himself, but not right now, not when her chest is still open on the inside. He thought I was asleep. He thought I was safely tucked in the numbness of unconsciousness. But I wasn't. I was awake inside my body, like someone trapped beneath rubble, aware of every sound, every vibration, every piece of truth that fell like dust over me, burying me deeper, in a grief I couldn't even lift my hands to wipe away. I felt a tear slide down the side of my face, warm at first, then cold as the air hit it. It collected at the corner of my lips, salty and bitter. Dr. Whitlock turned, saw it glistening against the pale skin of my cheek, and froze as if the world had suddenly stopped rotating. Slowly, ever so slowly, he leaned over, his face hovering above mine, his breath unsteady, his eyes widening with a mix of sorrow, anger, and something like helpless compassion. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The question fell between us like a fragile pane of glass. I wanted to answer. Oh God, how I wanted to answer, to tell him yes, I heard everything. Yes, that was my daughter. Yes, she meant it. Yes. The child I sacrificed everything for was raising a glass at the thought of my death. But all I could do was blink one slow, trembling blink. He saw it. His jaw tightened. And then, with a voice so low and intense it felt like a vow carved in stone, he whispered, "They think you're gone, but you're not. And I swear to you, Ramona, we will make this right." The monitor beside me beeped faster, betraying the storm inside my chest. A storm made not of fear, but of realization, the kind that changes a person forever. Because in that moment, buried under bandages and betrayal, unable to lift even a finger, I understood something I had spent a lifetime refusing to see. I wasn't dead, not yet, not physically. But in my daughter's heart, in her memories, in the place where a child is supposed to keep the warmth of a mother, I had died long before I ever stepped into that operating room. And that, God help me, was the deepest cut of all. People often like to believe that hatred between a mother and a child happens suddenly, a single moment, a single argument, a single disappointment, but the truth, at least in my life, is softer and sadder than that. Hatred, in my daughter Melissa's case, grew the way mold grows in the corner of a room you never look at. Quietly at first, then stubbornly, then all at once. Until one day, you realize the air has been poisoned for far longer than you ever knew. Her childhood should have been warm, ordinary, simple, but it wasn't. Her father, God rest his soul, loved her with a tenderness that made my heart swell on the good days, but on the bad ones, the nights when whiskey blurred his vision and loosened his tongue, he loved her far too loudly, far too blindly, far too fiercely, in a way that made her believe I was the enemy whenever I tried to protect her from his storms. When he was sober, he kissed her forehead and called her my little miracle. When he was drunk, which was often, he slurred that Melissa was the only good thing in this damn house and pushed me away when I tried to take the bottle from his hand. She grew up seeing her father praise her and push me aside in the same breath, and in that mixed, messy, confused affection, a seed took root, a belief that I was the one standing between her and the love she deserved. That seed sprouted on a night I can still remember with painful clarity. Melissa was 8 years old, wearing a blue tulle dress I had sewn by hand for her school recital, standing backstage with her hair curled and her eyes shining with expectation. I had promised her I would be there no matter what, no matter how busy my shift at the clinic was, but promises, even the ones whispered with love, can crumble under the weight of life. That afternoon, a 5-year-old girl was brought into the ER, bleeding, trembling, stabbed by her own father, and I could not walk away from her. I could not leave a child's life in danger, not when my hands were the only ones steady enough to stop the bleeding. By the time I reached the school, breathless and smelling of antiseptic, Melissa was sitting on the empty stage alone, her little feet dangling, her face streaked with dried tears, her classmates already gone home, her teacher already turning off the lights. She didn't say a word when she saw me. She didn't need to. Her silence was a knife, and the wound it made never truly healed. Her classmates, cruel in that casual way children often are, had told her, "Your mom cares more about strangers than she cares about you." And Melissa believed them. She carried that belief like a stone in her chest, heavy and unfair and impossible to talk her out of. Years later, when she was 16, the stone cracked open into something sharper. She stole $200 from our neighbor, money meant for that family's groceries, and when the truth came out, I made her march to their doorstep, apologize, and hand every dollar back. She looked at me with eyes full of shame and fury, as if I had humiliated her intentionally, as if I wanted to see her brought low. In that moment, she stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a barrier, someone who stood between her and the person she wanted so desperately to be. Admired, respected, envied. It didn't help that I was, in her mind, an embarrassment. Her friends' mothers wore heels and perfume. I wore scrubs and sneakers. Her friends' mothers drove clean SUVs. I drove a dented old sedan that coughed every winter morning. Her friends' mothers spent money on prom dresses. I mended hers with a sewing kit and love. Melissa looked at me one day when she was 17, looked at me as if she were staring at a stranger and said, "You make me ashamed every single day." When I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, the first time in my life I was truly frightened, she didn't visit me once. She told a mutual friend, "Old people exaggerate. It's probably nothing." The day she said the cruelest thing, the day the last thread between us frayed, we were standing in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter, and she said it so casually I didn't even register the words at first. "If you died, at least I'd get something from you." I laughed, then a small, confused laugh because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. And that was the moment I understood. I had loved my daughter with the whole of my life, and she had never once understood love the way I gave it. She mistook my sacrifices for neglect, my discipline for cruelty, my poverty for failure, my work for betrayal. She built her hatred slowly, year after year, brick by brick, until the day she finally said aloud what her heart had whispered for decades. My daughter didn't hate me because I harmed her. She hated me because she convinced herself that I hadn't loved her enough, even though I had loved her more than I loved my own life. The doctors insisted the surgery couldn't wait. Any further delay could have turned my failing heart into a fatal complication. If the hours before my surgery had been recorded on video, people might have assumed they were watching a crime thriller rather than the simple preparation of an old woman with a failing heart. Because while I lay in pre-op with an IV dripping cold saline into my veins, my daughter was not praying for me or signing consent forms with trembling hands. She was finalizing a plan so meticulously cruel and so disturbingly practical that even now, when I replay it in my mind, I'm not sure which part chills me more: the greed, the indifference, or the confidence she had in the idea that no one would ever question the death of a 74-year-old woman who already had one foot in the grave. A few months before my surgery, Melissa had quietly purchased a $500,000 life insurance policy with herself as the sole beneficiary, and she had done it with the same casual determination she applied to buying shoes, on sale, quick, decisive, and without an ounce of hesitation, telling the insurance agent that her mother was in poor health, probably won't last long. And I remember feeling a strange unease when the mailman slipped an envelope from the insurance company into my porch mail slot, but Melissa snatched it before I could read it, pressing a kiss to my cheek and saying she was handling the boring paperwork for me now. I had no idea she meant paperwork for my death. The next part of her plan was more calculated, more desperate, and far more illegal. She located an old document of mine, a permission slip I had signed years ago for a medical exam, and she scanned my signature, lifted it digitally, and placed it onto a DNR form, "Do not resuscitate," a form that would legally prevent doctors from saving me if anything went wrong on the operating table. She forgot, of course, that a DNR requires two signatures, the patient's and a witness's, and that tiny oversight, that small missing scribble, would become the first crack in her carefully constructed scheme. But Melissa wasn't finished. She reached out to a temporary physician, a man from an outsourced medical staffing agency, one of those doctors hospitals call when they're understaffed and desperate, a man with debts, a drinking habit, and a willingness to take shortcuts if the cash was thick enough. And she handed him an envelope containing $8,000 in crisp bills, whispering instructions that should have damned her on the spot. If things go wrong, just let her go. Don't revive her. Don't call in a crash team. Just say her heart never came back. And that man, whose name I would later learn and spit out like poison, nodded, as if she had asked him to change a light bulb rather than end a life, my life, and Melissa walked away, believing everything had been arranged neatly, cleanly, efficiently. But fate or God or karma or whatever hand moves quietly through the mess of human decisions had other plans. Just hours before my surgery, the doctor Melissa had bribed was pulled away for an emergency trauma case, a horrific car accident on the interstate involving 3 victims and a multi-vehicle pileup. The hospital had no choice. They rerouted cases, they shifted personnel, they reassigned surgical teams. And just like that, with a randomness that still feels like a miracle to me, my life slipped out of the hands of a corrupt man and into the hands of Dr. Aaron Whitlock, the hospital's senior cardiothoracic surgeon, a man known for being meticulous, principled, and annoyingly thorough, the kind of doctor Melissa would have avoided if she had known he was on duty. The moment Aaron opened my file, he noticed things didn't add up. The DNR form looked official at first glance, but its lack of a witness signature made it invalid the moment it touched hospital property. Whoever forged it didn't understand that a DNR wasn't something you could copy-paste from a Google image and expect the medical staff to obey. Then a nurse, young, nervous, shifting from foot to foot, mentioned that Melissa had handed someone a thick envelope earlier in the hallway, calling it a thank you for helping my mother have a peaceful passing. And Aaron, who had seen enough elder abuse cases to recognize the stench of manipulation, felt the first twinge of suspicion curl beneath his ribs. He didn't confront Melissa, not yet. Instead, he asked her a few gentle questions. Did she understand the procedure? Had I expressed wishes not to be revived? Did she have any other documents she wanted on file? Her answers were inconsistent, too rehearsed, too disinterested, and when Aaron stepped away, he did something Melissa never expected. He turned on the voice recorder on his hospital-issued tablet and captured her next words verbatim. I just want it to be peaceful. She's already lived long enough. And once she's gone, everything will be easier. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. Aaron saved the recording, locking it with his personal passcode, not yet realizing who I was to him, not remembering the frightened 9-year-old boy I once held in my arms after his father broke his ribs, the boy whose name I never forgot, the boy who would one day grow into the man now standing over my surgical documents, unknowingly returning a debt I never asked him to repay. But that revelation, that twist of destiny, was still waiting in the shadows. For now, all that mattered was this. Melissa's plan had begun to crumble. A forged signature, a missing witness, a nervous nurse, a reassigned surgeon, and a doctor who did not believe in letting old women die because it made life more convenient for their children. While I lay unconscious in a hospital bed with stitches still fresh across my chest, my breath thin and mechanical beneath the rhythm of machines, my daughter, the child I had nursed through broken bones and fevers and heartbreaks, was hosting what she proudly titled Freedom Night, a celebration so grotesque in spirit and so dazzling in appearance that if you had walked into the room without context, you would have thought it was a New Year's Eve gala rather than a party meant to toast the assumed death of a 74-year-old woman who had once carried its hostess inside her body. The living room of Melissa's suburban Nashville home had been transformed into something that pulsed with reckless life. Bright laser lights slicing through the dim space, the bass from the EDM speakers thudding against the walls hard enough to rattle the frames, holding family photos, glitter confetti scattered across the floor, and rows of champagne bottles lined up on the kitchen counter like soldiers waiting to be deployed. The guests, at least 20 of them, were dressed as if attending a celebration of liberation, which, in their minds, they were. And Melissa, wearing a sequined gold dress that sparkled under the shifting lights like molten sunlight, lifted her phone in one manicured hand and hit Go Live, setting the stream to private, visible only to her closest circle, and typed the caption with the ease of someone sending a casual joke. Free at last. The comments rolled in, immediately laughing emojis, fire emojis, champagne glasses, digital applause for an event none of them should have found funny. Her friends gathered around her, glasses clinking, voices rising above the music with the kind of cruelty that doesn't even disguise itself as humor. Good riddance, one woman said as she tossed her hair back, her lips curved into a smug little smile. She dragged you down for years, another chimed in while popping open a bottle, letting champagne explode across the countertop. Sell her stuff before she's even cold, a man joked, and everyone laughed as if death were merely an inconvenient obstacle between Melissa and her next shopping spree. But the cruelty didn't stop there. Her daughter, my granddaughter, Avery, a girl whose tiny hand I had held while teaching her to cross the street, whose hair I had brushed while humming lullabies, leaned against the edge of the kitchen island, scrolling through TikTok with bored disdain, and muttered loudly enough for the group to hear, "Grandma always smelled like hospitals." Someone snorted. Avery smirked and added, "She always looked pathetic, honestly." No one corrected her. No one looked uncomfortable. Instead, they laughed again, a chorus of hollow, heartless echoes bouncing across the room while Melissa raised her champagne glass in mock sympathy. But the darkest moment of the night came when Melissa, emboldened by alcohol and applause, grabbed a small wooden box from under the coffee table, a cedar box with carved corners that my late husband, Tom, had kept all his life, a box I had protected for decades because it contained the last piece of him left on this earth. Inside that box was the certificate proving that Tom's organs had saved 3 people, a firefighter, a teacher, and a 14-year-old boy, the kind of legacy that brings honor to a family. But to Melissa, it brought nothing. Nothing except disgust. She flipped the lid open, glanced at the documents inside, and without a flicker of hesitation or reverence, rolled her eyes and said, "Trash, burn it." Someone laughed. Someone clapped. Someone laughed and leaned forward, whispering, "Go on. She won't need it where she's going." I wasn't there to see it, but I would later watch the footage, and in that moment on video, Melissa tossed the certificate toward the nearest candle as if she were discarding a grocery list rather than the record of her father's final gift to the world. And that was when a young woman in the corner stiffened. Her name was Ruth Calloway, 28 years old, soft-spoken, the kind of person who blended into the background until the moment she didn't. She had come to the party because a mutual friend had dragged her along, telling her it was just a fun, adults-only night. Ruth had no idea what the event was truly about until she stepped inside and began hearing pieces of conversation, fragmented sentences about a dead grandmother, insurance money, a celebration long overdue. But the moment Melissa opened that cedar box, the moment Ruth saw the certificate, something inside her clicked into terrifying clarity. Because when she was 9 years old, Ruth had been in a horrific bus accident, one that left her pinned under a seat, bleeding, terrified, certain she was going to die, until a woman in a nurse's uniform crawled through the wreckage and held her hand, whispering that she wasn't going anywhere, that help was on the way, that she was safe. That woman was me. Ruth remembered my face the way one remembers angels in the dark. So as she watched Melissa mock the legacy of the man who had loved me and dismiss the value of the woman who had once saved her life, she felt something tighten inside her, a quiet, righteous fury, and she reached for her phone, opened the camera, and began recording everything. Not for gossip, not for attention, but for justice. Because sometimes the universe waits years, even decades, to weave two lives back together at the exact moment truth is needed most. And Ruth, though she didn't know it yet, was about to become the witness who would unravel every cruel thread my daughter had woven. There are moments in a woman's life, and especially in the life of a woman as old and weathered as I am, when sound becomes sharper than sight, when truth becomes louder than breath, when the world narrows into nothing but a single voice, dripping venom straight into the cracks of a wounded heart. Lying there with my chest bandaged, my throat dry, and my body weak enough that even blinking felt like lifting furniture, I heard my daughter's voice again, not through a memory, not through imagination, but through the speaker of the phone held inches from my bed, each syllable as clean and cruel as a knife freshly honed. "She should have died sooner," Melissa said, laughing, her voice distorted only slightly by the music pounding behind her as the party raged on. "Honestly, I thought the old hag would last forever. But the insurance money will be released in 48 hours, so we're finally done with all this." 48 hours. Insurance money. Done with all this. The words crawled over my skin like insects. I could barely breathe past them. There was a clink of glasses, a cheer from her guests, and then another sentence, brighter, meaner, more triumphant. "This is the first night I've felt free in years." My breath hitched small, involuntary, but sharp enough for Dr. Aaron Whitlock to notice. I hadn't meant to react, but hearing my daughter speak of me like a paid-off bill made my heart convulse against fresh sutures. Aaron froze when the monitor spiked, then slowly approached, realizing tightening his face, his brows drawing together as if he were witnessing a tragedy no medical training could ever prepare him for. "Ma'am," he whispered, leaning close, his voice trembling despite the effort he made to steady it. "Can you hear me?" I wanted to answer God, how I wanted to answer, but my lips refused to lift, and my throat refused to form words, so all I could do was part my eyelids just enough to let the light slip through, just enough to let him see that I was awake inside this aching body. He inhaled sharply, a sound filled with stunned sorrow and rising anger, and the phone in his hand lowered slowly as the truth dawned on him, the truth that I had heard everything, that the cruelty coming from that party had not bounced off sterile walls, but had pierced straight into me. "She heard," he murmured to himself, his voice cracking like glass. "Oh God, she heard." His jaw clenched, his eyes glistened. Something inside him shifted, a line crossed, a choice made. With a resolve born from outrage rather than duty, he stepped away from my bedside and moved toward the far corner of the room, pulling out his hospital-issued phone, the one used only for secure communication with law enforcement and critical response teams. His back was to me, but I could hear the gravity in every breath he took as he dialed a number he clearly knew by heart. "Sheriff Hill?" Aaron said, his tone suddenly firm, controlled, stripped of the gentleness he used with patience. "It's Dr. Whitlock. I need to file an immediate concern involving potential elder abuse, involving attempted homicide." My heart faltered at the word, but he continued. "Yes, the patient is Ramona Bennett, 74, post-cardiac surgery." A pause, a deep one. Then Aaron added quietly, "Sheriff, it's her daughter. I have evidence she tried to arrange for the procedure to fail." Aaron had no idea that the sheriff on the other end of the line was about to recognize my name and change the entire direction of the case. There was a rustle of movement on the other end of the line, then a voice faint but unmistakably urgent. "Sheriff Thomas Hill." I didn't know that name then. Not yet. Aaron continued, "I have a forged DNR. I have a staff report of attempted bribery, and I have a live audio feed of the daughter admitting motive and intent at a party right now." Another long pause, longer, heavier, almost reverent, before Sheriff Hill said, "Dr. Whitlock, is this the same Ramona Bennett from the East River accident of 1999? Aaron hesitated, caught off guard. "Yes, I believe so." There was a tremor in the sheriff's exhale, one I could feel from across the room. Then, a voice thick with recognition. "She saved my life when I was 18. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Aaron lowered the phone, and for a moment he simply stood there, shoulders shaking with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but lived somewhere in between, a kind of righteous fury that only surfaces when a good person sees evil being done to someone who never deserved it. He turned back toward me slowly, stepping closer, his expression softening into something achingly protective. "Ramona," he whispered, as if saying my name might break me, "you're not alone. Not anymore. We're going to make this right." And though I still couldn't lift my hand, still couldn't speak, still couldn't do anything but lie there beneath the weight of what my daughter had done, I felt something warm settle in my chest, not physical warmth, not healing warmth, but the warmth of knowing that for the first time in a very long time, someone stood between me and the people who wished me dead. Someone who saw me. Someone who believed me. Someone who refused to let me be buried alive. The days after the surgery did not pass gently. They dragged across my body the way winter drags across old bones, slow and aching, and filled with a cold that no blanket, no heater, no nurse's smile could fully warm. And for the first time in my 74 years, I understood what it meant to be alive yet forgotten, breathing yet unwanted, present yet erased, because for 2 entire weeks after I opened my eyes in that sterile white room, my daughter never called, not once, not even to ask if I had lived through the night she toasted my death. I had given birth to her. She couldn't even dial a phone. No friends visited, no neighbors. Not a single relative knocked on the doorframe with flowers or soup, or even a polite attempt to pretend they cared. Instead, the only sign of my family's existence came from a glowing phone screen that Bella, the young nurse's aide, accidentally showed me while scrolling through her breaks. There, dancing across the screen under flashing lights, was my granddaughter Avery, smiling broadly, clinking glasses, spinning in a sparkly top, while the caption over her TikTok video read, "Freedom Night? 4,000 views, oh my God." 4,000 strangers celebrated my freedom too. They didn't know they were cheering the survival of a woman they thought was already in the ground. Freedom from what? Me? I did not cry when I saw it, not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain had gone beyond tears, settling somewhere deep and quiet, almost numb, the way a wound goes after bleeding too long. The only 2 people who stood by me in those 14 days were people who had no obligation to do so, no blood connection, no reason except kindness and a strange twist of fate. Dr. Aaron Whitlock, who checked on me even during hours he wasn't scheduled to be in the cardiac unit, who spoke to me with the gentleness of someone handling glass, who adjusted my pillows, retaped my IV line, and always stayed 1 extra minute before leaving the room, as if making sure I wasn't slipping away. There was something in his eyes I couldn't name, then a mixture of responsibility, sorrow, and recognition that hovered on the edge of memory. And Bella, 25 years old, earning barely enough to pay rent, yet caring for me as if I were her own grandmother. She brushed my thinning hair, moisturized my hands, hummed little songs while changing my sheets, and scolded the night shift nurses if they forgot to bring me warmed blankets. On the morning of my 4th day awake, when the bruising on my chest hardened into purple constellations and each breath felt like dragging a stone uphill, Bella walked in, carrying a tiny cup of applesauce. She smiled in that soft, nervous way young people do when they don't know how to fix a broken world. "Your daughter hasn't come by yet?" she asked, trying and failing to hide the hope in her voice. I shook my head ever so slightly. The movement hurt. Bella sat at the edge of my bed, her warm hand covering mine, a hand so young it felt like spring pressed against winter. She whispered, "Then you have me, and Dr. Aaron, and we won't let anything happen to you." That was when the tears came, not because of her words, but because she was the only one who cared. Those 2 weeks became a battlefield of body and soul, teaching me the cost of breathing after betrayal and the weight of forced loneliness. Every day was pain, trembling legs, screaming ribs, a raw throat. But the breathing exercises hurt most each breath, a reminder that surviving can hurt more than dying. Yet every time I faltered, every time I closed my eyes and wished briefly that I hadn't woken up at all, I heard Melissa's voice echo back to me through memory. She should have died sooner. 48 hours, insurance payout, freedom. Those words became the sharp, ugly fuel that kept me alive. On the 9th day, when Aaron walked in and found me sitting up without assistance for the first time, pain pulling at the corners of my mouth but determination anchoring my spine, he let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief mixed with awe. "Mrs. Bennett," he murmured, "you're getting stronger." "No," I whispered, my voice raspy but clear. "I'm getting ready." He didn't ask what for. He didn't need to. By the 12th day, I was standing only for seconds at a time, trembling like a leaf in wind, but standing nonetheless. By the 14th day, I could walk with a metal walker, each step a victory, each step a defiance. The nurses saw a fragile old woman recovering from surgery. Aaron saw a survivor. Bella saw a grandmother rising. But I saw something else, something forged from pain instead of hope, from abandonment instead of love, from betrayal instead of family. I saw purpose. On the last evening of those 2 long weeks, as the sun set over Nashville and painted the hospital walls a soft gold, I stood holding onto the walker, my voice steadier than it had been in months, and I said the words that would define everything that came next. I am not dead. I live, so I can look into the eyes of the one who tried to bury me. The party hadn't truly stopped. It had simply spilled into a second night, fueled by alcohol and the thrill of what they thought was freedom. 2 days after my daughter toasted my death, her house pulsed like a dark heartbeat under the Nashville summer heat. Music blasted the same hollow EDM from the night of my surgery, shaking the walls. And there, drunk on champagne and cruelty, stood Melissa in her glittering sequin dress, cheeks flushed, smiling with the triumph of a woman who believed she had finally severed the last thread connecting her to the mother she wanted gone. She raised a fresh glass, letting the golden liquid slosh over the rim as she held it high, and with the giddy energy of someone who had rehearsed this moment for years, she shouted, "To the death of Ramona Bennett." Her friends cheered loud, shrill, mindless, clinking their glasses and throwing hands in the air like they were dancing at a concert rather than toasting the imagined passing of a woman who had once fed them cookies at birthday parties. But before their glasses even touched their lips, before the next wave of laughter could echo off the walls, a thunderous voice shattered the room. "Police! Everyone stay where you are!" The music stumbled to a stop as if frightened into silence. The lights flickered, someone screamed, someone dropped a glass, Champagne splashed across the hardwood floor, and Melissa, frozen in mid-toast, stared at the front door where 4 uniformed officers charged in, followed by a taller man in a brown sheriff's jacket, Sheriff Thomas Hill, his badge gleaming beneath the porch light, spilling through the open doorway. Chaos bloomed instantly. Guests scrambled backward, pressing themselves against furniture, wiping their mouths as if guilt could be scrubbed from their lips. Others lifted their hands instinctively, their faces twisting into masks of confusion and fear. But Melissa, poor foolish Melissa, tried to smile, tried to charm, tried to pretend nothing was wrong. "Officers," she stammered, lowering her glass as though suddenly realizing how incriminating it looked. Is there a problem?" Sheriff Hill stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. "Yes," he said, his voice low enough to still the room, "there is." And that was when everything began to unravel. Near the back of the room, pressed into the shadows as if unsure whether she belonged there at all, Ruth Calloway stood trembling, her phone clutched tightly in her shaking hands. The moment the officers entered, she had taken a single step forward, then another, her breath hitching, her courage rising like a tide she couldn't stop even if she wanted to. "Sheriff Hill," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the heavy quiet that had settled over the room. He turned toward her. She swallowed hard, then extended her phone with both hands, as one might offer an artifact too precious to risk dropping. I have something you need to see." Melissa's eyes widened, sharp with recognition and panic. "You little snitch," she spat, lunging forward. But 2 officers stepped into her path instantly, blocking her as Ruth, voice quivering, unlocked her phone and opened the video she had recorded 2 nights earlier. The sheriff watched in silence as the images played out the strobe lights, the cruel jokes, the raised glasses, the cruel dismissal of my husband's cherished cedar box. The moment Melissa dropped the certificate, proving that Tom had saved 3 lives, and said, "Trash. Burn it." Sheriff Hill's jaw tightened, and the smallest flicker of disgust crossed his face. But he watched the entire video. Every second, every cruel word. When it ended, the room seemed to hold its breath. Melissa broke first. "That doesn't mean anything," she snapped, her voice rising into a panicked pitch. "It was a joke, just a stupid party, she's dying anyway." Sheriff Hill raised a hand, silencing her. His expression had changed, softer, but in a way that only made his next words sharper. "I know who your mother is," he said, "and I know exactly what she's done." Melissa blinked. Confused, offended, terrified. "What the hell does that mean?" The sheriff didn't answer in words, not yet. He simply stepped aside, clearing space for the final blow. Dr. Aaron Whitlock entered the room. The gasps that followed were instant after all. A surgeon in scrubs standing in the middle of a house party was not a sight anyone expected, but what unsettled the crowd even more was the unwavering fury behind his usually calm eyes. He held a small folder in one hand, a tablet in the other, and he did not hesitate as he introduced himself. "I'm Dr. Whitlock," he said, "and I'm here to provide medical evidence regarding the attempted killing of my patient, Ramona Bennett." Melissa's knees visibly buckled. "That's not. You can't." "I didn't." But Aaron continued, his voice steady, controlled, mercilessly precise. "First," he said, lifting the forged DNR form, "this document, presented by Melissa Bennett as her mother's request, is fraudulent. There is no witness signature, the patient's signature is digitally reproduced, and it matches an older medical form on file down to the pixel. This is evidence of criminal falsification." He handed it to an officer. "Second," he continued, tapping the tablet, "I have an audio recording of Melissa Bennett bribing a contract physician to neglect life-saving measures during surgery." He played a clip, Melissa's voice echoing through the room. "If she flatlines, don't revive her. I'll make sure you get the rest." Several guests gasped. One woman cried. Another whispered, "Oh my God, Melissa." But Aaron wasn't finished. "And third," he said quietly, "we have documented testimony from a nurse who witnessed Melissa delivering a large cash payment in a sealed envelope to the same physician." Melissa's face collapsed into horror. No, you don't understand. But Sheriff Hill cut her off, stepping forward as he reached into his jacket. Melissa Bennett, he said, his voice booming through the stunned silence. You are under arrest for attempted homicide and insurance fraud. Gasps. Cries. Silence. Melissa backed away, as if the room were folding in on her. No, please, I didn't mean. She's old. She was going to die anyway. Her friends turned from her. Avery stepped backward, pale and shaking. 2 officers took Melissa by the wrists, pulling her hands behind her. The metallic click of handcuffs sliced through the room like fate slamming shut. Sheriff Hill leaned in close enough for only Melissa to hear, and said quietly, "You don't get to decide when a good woman dies." And then she was led out the door, her sequined dress flashing under the streetlights like a warning, like a lesson, like justice finally catching up to the cruelty she had mistaken for power. Justice, I learned, does not arrive in a thunderclap or a blaze of glory. Instead, it moves slowly, steadily, like an old river carving its way through stubborn stone, reshaping everything in its path until the truth finally stands exposed, undeniable, and unshakable. And for me, that truth came in the form of a courtroom packed with reporters, attorneys, and strangers leaning forward as if witnessing something holy. While Melissa, my daughter, my only child, stood trembling between 2 bailiffs, pale from the fluorescent lights and the weight of consequences she had never truly believed would reach her. The judge read her sentence in a voice that carried no anger, no pity, only the solemn authority of a man who had seen too many tragedies caused by greed disguised as family duty. Melissa Bennett, for the crimes of attempted homicide, insurance fraud, and aggravated elder abuse, with evidence of premeditation, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. 25 years. A full quarter of a century. And though my heart did not leap with joy, because no mother, no matter how wounded, celebrates the downfall of her own child, there was a strange, heavy relief that settled into my bones, a recognition that what she had tried to do to me could no longer be hidden behind excuses, anger, or entitlement. She had chosen her path, stone by stone, lie by lie, cruelty by cruelty, and now she had to walk it to the end. Her nail salon, the business she had once flaunted as proof of her independence, shuttered within a week, its windows papered over, its sign removed, its reputation ruined after the news broadcast her crimes across Nashville. And Avery, my granddaughter, whose careless, mocking words at Freedom Night had cut deeper than she knew, was sentenced to 300 hours of community service at a nursing home. The irony so sharp it almost made me laugh, though not unkindly. Sometimes the world has a way of teaching lessons gently for those still young enough to change. The doctor Melissa bribed cold enough to take her envelope of cash, as if ethics were optional, lost his medical license within 48 hours. His career collapsed as quickly as that money had slipped into his pocket. Actions create echoes, and theirs finally came back to them. While the world absorbed the scandal, I made choices of my own, not for revenge, but to reclaim the pieces of my life Melissa tried to erase. I rewrote my will, removing her completely. Instead, I divided everything into 3 parts. One for Ruth, the young woman who recorded the truth just as bravely as I once pulled her from a shattered bus. One for a foundation helping abused children, because love must reach them before resentment takes root. And the last for the cardiac unit, chosen by Dr. Aaron Whitlock, the man who protected me before remembering I once protected him. The nurse was me. When he entered the room, he didn't speak at first, he simply handed me the photograph, his voice breaking only when he managed to whisper, "Mrs. Bennett, you saved me twice." And in that moment, something inside my chest loosened, as if the final knot of fear and loneliness had finally untied itself. We were no longer strangers. We were lives intertwined by fate, gratitude, and quiet redemption. On the last day of my hospital stay, as the sun slipped behind the Nashville skyline and turned the windows into sheets of molten gold, I stood beside the long glass wall overlooking the city, my home, the place where I had suffered, survived, and risen again. Below me, Nashville glowed alive, steady, and unbroken. I felt my breath settle steady, certain, alive. Then, softly but clearly, with the weight of a woman who had seen death brush past her and refused to follow, I said the words that had been waiting inside me since the day Melissa lifted her glass. They wanted me dead so they could be free. But I lived so they would have to face the truth. And with that, my story, painful, crooked, heavy with betrayal, finally closed on a note of strength, because I was still standing, still breathing, still here. And that was my justice. Not loud, not violent, just the quiet truth finally speaking for itself. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, then from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Stories like mine aren't easy to tell, and I know they aren't always easy to hear. But sometimes the truth carried by an old woman is the only thing that reminds us what strength really looks like and what justice truly sounds like. I lived, I survived, and I found my voice again, not to shout, but to finally speak the truth that had been buried for far too long. If my story touched you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone you love, someone you lost, or someone who tried to break you, then I hope you'll stay with me a little longer. Because here, in Grandma True Stories, every story is a memory that refused to stay silent. Every story is a wound that finally healed. Every story is a woman who lived through more than the world ever knew and is finally ready to speak. So if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join this quiet porch of honest voices. There will always be another story, another truth, another grandmother who finally decides, enough. It's time the world hears me. Thank you for listening. And until the next story, take care of your heart and never let anyone bury your truth. This is Grandma True Stories, where wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers.